Welcome back to the Seedy AF podcast. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm the Omega. We're happy to have you back for another episode as we delve into how we, as a married couple, first got into this adult game industry. Now let's get seedy.
Last episode, we answered the most frequent question that we get, what's it like to work with your spouse all day? In today's episode, we're going to delve into the question that we get asked about second most, how did we get started in the adult game industry?
I'm not going to lie to you, it's been a long journey so far, and we're going to share the story of how our passion for gaming in general, how being creative, and a little bit of the right time, right place helped pave the way for us to break into this industry. When I first found out about these games, it was back in 2017. I stumbled upon them, and I went on one of the common websites where you find these games, these adult games, and I ended up finding Dreams of Desire and Summertime Saga. And when I first found them, I was like, oh man, that is so cool. And I was immediately thinking about, I could do this too. I don't think it'd be that hard. And then I pulled the trigger, as I typically do with these things, to first, put my toe in the water. And when I ended up trying it out, I was like, oh man, this takes a lot of effort. It's a lot more than I thought it was going to be, and a lot of time invested in.
So I remember when you first came to me and showed me these games, and that alone I think might surprise people, because I do know for a fact that many of our players don't tell their spouse that they play these games. A lot of people, I think, don't share a lot of their more private, porn or adult game or other adult content that they consume. That's not something that they share with their partner. That's something that they enjoy separate from their partner. Although obviously not true for everybody. We do know players as well that share these games with their partner or spouse. But I think it also just speaks to the fact that we are very open people, and we do have very open communication. That when you first showed me these games, there was no hesitation or shame or any issue there at all. I remember kind of rolling my eyes in a way, because you have a very entrepreneurial spirit and have tried to start many businesses in the past. And not all of them they've had varying levels of success. But I always have supported the fact that you really wanted to start your own business. But I was just kind of like, okay, well, let's see how it goes. I do remember that I was involved with the original script for Prince of Suburbia, helping to edit it and to create the original story. And for a little bit of context, probably another reason why this is something that I was comfortable with and that the Omega felt comfortable coming to me with, is that I have a background in romance writing and, had dabbled in trying to self-publish and did self-publish some romance writing, in the 2010s. A little bit before he started with this, but that it did pique my interest in that sense of, I have been interested in writing things in this genre, just not specifically video games to start with. But that's probably also a little bit where my my skeptical eye roll came into play. Was not because I don't trust the Omega to create a successful business, but more just that I had dabbled in it myself and hadn't been super successful because the romance market is extremely saturated. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, good luck with that. But here we are. So I'm eating my words.
Originally, I was like, I really want to make this a full-time thing. Like, I'm tired of working for the man. I just want to be my own boss. Like Jocelyn was saying, I've tried lots of different business ideas before, and this is one that I really looked at the market, and I was like, I think we can make this happen. We could pull this off, and it would be so amazing. But like I said, it was either a shit out or get off the pot kind of situation. I couldn't invest enough time into it to actually, accomplish the vision originally. So that's when I went into part-time development, and like I said, eventually paused. And honestly, the only reason why Prince of Suburbia even came back was because I had a few fans come and beg for development to continue, and then they offered to support the game on the part-time, very limited funding, and it actually continued, and that's why that game has gone on for so long at this point.
To nail down the timeline, Prince of Suburbia was started in 2017, and then until 2021, it was kind of in this like in and out, back and forth, sometimes part-time. I was always generally aware of its existence and would ask for updates on how it was going. But aside from kind of helping with that initial setup, I didn't have a lot of direct involvement, nor did you, because you were, like you said, kind of managing a staff in like a project management role. In 2021, I was kind of at that crossroads where I never thought I would be. If there's anybody between the two of us that's entrepreneurial and always wanted to start their own business, it's definitely the Omega. And I've always said that I would never want to start my own business or be my own boss, but, never say never. By 2021, I was in the education profession, and the pandemic was really, really hard for that profession. And I was getting really burnt out, and I just felt like I was ready for something totally different. And so I just remember us having a lot of conversations around that time of what I could pivot into, what I wanted to do instead. I was having a bit of a, early midlife identity crisis. And I don't remember who brought it up first, but
it was definitely you.
I honestly don't remember. But, the topic of, our ongoing Seedy business came up. And yeah, at that time, it was just kind of this languishing side hustle that, was just kind of being barely kept on life support, but it was there and it had survived. And that says something about it. But it wasn't, something that was immediately obvious that it could be successful. But yeah, I don't remember how we started talking about that specifically, but I started thinking about, what if I took my knowledge of the romance genre and self-publishing and all of the skills that I've acquired and all the different jobs that I've done, like, could I turn this into a successful business? And I just remember saying that phrase so many times of like, can we really do this? Like, the more we talked about it, and we talked about me, quitting my full-time paid job with benefits, super secure job with a pension, and, turning this adult game, this kind of languishing adult game that we had been kind of just running on the sidelines for years, like turning that into a successful full-time job for myself. At first sounded kind of crazy, but like the more we talked about it, the more realistic it seemed. And I think a lot of that is because even though, you were kind of in and out of the industry for those years, like you always had a foot in the door. And so you had been watching the industry and you had a lot of knowledge about the industry. And therefore I had that by extension, because as we, talked about, we collaborate so closely, we live together, like we are kind of a hive mind in that sense that we talk so much and we communicate so much that everything you knew about the adult game industry, I already knew as well. And then I, like I said, could bring this knowledge of the romance industry to it. At first it seemed like too good to be true. Like we felt like we had a plan and we knew how to make this successful, but on the surface it seemed like too easy. Like, and in hindsight, the reality is that there's a few barriers to entry to this industry that we just didn't fully recognize because we were not fully immersed in it yet. And one of those barriers to entry, I think, is just being comfortable with sex. And I think that's something that we took for granted, that we are both very comfortable talking about sex and therefore working with sex-related things. And a lot of people are just not comfortable with that. And so immediately that takes it off the table as an option for them. And so, that's a huge barrier to entry that we did not consider. And then I think also too, as we've learned, one of the barriers to entry is, I saw a Reddit comment once that said that game development requires, or solo adult game development requires, an absolutely demonic skill set. And I definitely believe that's true now that I've done it. And I think we took for granted that we have had a variety of different careers and a lot of different experiences in our life that gave us that skill set to do all these disparate things. But, for me, it was kind of invigorating to think about being able to work on a creative endeavor that would allow people to explore their sexuality and their kinks and their fetishes in a safe, fun way, because that was always my goal when I worked in the romance industry, was, exploring darker themes and dark romance. That was always an area of the romance genre that really appealed to me. And so, it was kind of exciting to think that maybe I really could turn this into something that was financially sustainable.
Yeah, as you were saying, you weren't sure who came up with the first. I'm pretty positive it was you. I distinctly remember you coming into the room where my workstation is that one day and being like, can we do this? Can we make this happen? Like, it was obvious that you wanted something else other than the education field like you were talking about. And I was like, with a smirk on my face, I was like, yeah, we can. But it's going to be a lot of work, and we both understood that. And the reality is, I tell this to Jocelyn all the time, I wouldn't do this without her because it is so much fucking work.
Yeah, we say that all the time. Like, I started alone in terms of I was the one that quit my job and started working full time to make this into a legitimate business. I, completely rewrote Prince Suburbia because it had, been worked on by different people throughout the years. And so it was a little bit disjointed. And so, I just sat down and rewrote the whole thing so that it was consistently in my voice. And I started learning how to use DAZ, the 3D software. And, I started doing all these things on my own, but it was with the understanding that once it got to a point that it was sustainable, that the Omega was also going to come on and work with me full time. And at that time, he was working from home at a job. So we were still in the same house, and I could come to him when I had questions or needed support. And yeah, we say it all the time. I would not do this without you. It is I don't know how solo developers do it. It is too much to do by yourself.
Yeah, and to peel back the curtain even more, I remember telling Jocelyn, I was like, yeah, you're going to do the animations too. You're going to be just fine. It's going to be great. This is while I was working a professional web development job still and hadn't quit to do full-time work on this adult game industry. But anyways, I was telling Jocelyn that, and she's like, oh, I'm nervous about this. And I was like, yeah, we're going to do 1 month updates for Shot in the Dark.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have 1 month updates, and they're going to have like 800 renders. And at this point, I was already starting to work pretty regularly in DAZ, in the 3D rendering engine, and seeing how long it took to make these things. I remember I didn't say anything at that time, but I was kind of panicking a little bit inside. Like, is this really what he thinks is possible? Because again, I trust his judgment so much, and he had a little bit more experience in this industry than I did. And I'm like, well, if he thinks this is possible, it must be possible. And I do think, both of us have like really strong work ethics. Like, we're not allergic to hard work. And so I think sometimes we can delude ourselves into thinking like, if we just work hard enough, like we'll get it done. And oftentimes reality slaps us in the face.
And to be fair to myself, part of the reason why I was asking her to do the animations too is I was still working the job for the man, and I was so tired of it. So I was doing that, and I was helping to code the foundation for Shot in the Dark at the same time. But in reality, as we've come to the conclusion long ago, I had to do the animations in order to make this pipeline actually work, because the renders and the writing is a fucking lot.
Yeah, I think the writing is the piece that I underestimated the most, because I do have a lot of experience with writing, and I am a very fast writer by, normal industry standards. And so to me, I just remember saying so many times like, oh yeah, and then that's just writing. Like that's the easy part. That won't take any time. Like any extra thing that we thought about adding, if it was writing heavy, it was like, oh yeah, well, I'll just write it. Like that piece takes no time. In my mind, the art took so much longer than the writing, that the writing was like insignificant. But the reality that we've learned is that the writing and the art both take a lot of time in their own right. And so that's definitely a place in which I'm eating my words also, which is that the writing is much harder than I anticipated. But I remember the day that we decided that you would do the animations and I would do the renders. And that was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders.
I could see it, yep.
This is going to make it so much more sustainable. And also, as I've joked many times, if you had only been doing the coding, not that the coding isn't a lot of work, but you would have been sitting on your hands a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would have been sipping Mai Tais, being like, how's it going, Jocelyn?
Yeah, that would have bred some resentment. So I'm glad that we talk a lot about how we make a really good team, and we're just really good at getting a division of duties that is fair and that we're both happy with, and that both plays to our strengths. And, that's just an area where I think that we're really strong.
Well, one last thing I'll mention too is one thing that we get some talk about from our fans is like, how can you guys work on 2 games together? Like, isn't that a little bit crazy? Is it going to delay things? The reality is it does delay things a little bit for the other games, but not by that much, because we have pipelines as efficient as we can get them, and we're still improving upon that. So yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but we're doing it, we're making it happen, and we're trying to deliver the best possible games that we can for both of these.
Yeah, and speaking to that, I think too, it may seem crazy that we work on 2 games, but I think that it really helps us avoid burnout, because they are 2 totally different games. One is 2D, one is 3D. The writing is totally different. The coding is totally different. One is more sandbox. One is more, choice-based visual novel. And so I do think too that, at first when we decided to make this a full-time venture, I was a little bit nervous about trying to make 2 such different games. And, but it just kind of seemed like a no-brainer. We've already started this one game. We might as well finish it while we start the next one. In hindsight, it was the best decision that we could have made, because it's made our business sustainable, and it helps us avoid burnout, and it helps us to fill those lulls where, once you've like coded an entire update, like you just kind of need a break from that game, and to, be able to kind of focus on the other game for a little bit and go back and forth. I think makes us more, means that we're always working on something, because working on one thing is like a break from the other thing. So business-wise, it's been a good decision for us.
Yep, and we're trying to, make games that have different themes and kinks, if you will. So that's one big thing that our approach is. We want to have fun making these games, and that is the requirement for us to put creativity and passion into it because it's a new experience for us too. And we just want to be able to provide an opportunity for people to come in and have fun, maybe experience new kinks they haven't seen before and be like, oh, I like that. I can distinctly remember people talking about like the lactation in Prince of Burbia. They're like, I didn't know I had a thing for milk, but now I do.
Now I know. Exactly. And I think, as I said, I never thought that I would ever run my own business, let alone enjoy running my own business. But I think, I've always had a lot of requirements for the jobs that I have. Like I need my job to be challenging. I need my job to be really varied and not boring and to be changing all the time. And, that's definitely something that we get in this industry. I'm doing coding, I'm doing art, I'm doing writing, I'm doing marketing, I'm doing promotion. We're both doing all of those things. And so, we get to do a lot of different types of tasks, and we get to learn and grow in all these different areas. And it's never boring. And it's one of the reasons too why we plan to always make very different games. Whereas I know some developers kind of get into a groove with what they're making and they keep making more of that. And I totally understand that. But I just know that we get bored too easily. So we would never be able to just make the same thing over and over again. We don't like that routine. We want to mix it up a little bit. So, I think we got into the right industry for that.
Yeah, it's definitely a goal of ours to not burn out. And if we don't burn out, that means we continue to develop these games. And I would imagine that that's what our fans want too.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I just wanted to make sure that you talk about you taking the leap to do this full time, because we talked about how I quit my job and I made this my full-time job. But, I think one of the coolest things for a lot of people is the fact that we both were able to quit our jobs and do this full time.
Yeah, it was always a goal for us to both be able to do this full time. And the reality is that Prince of Burbia was more successful than we thought it would be. And I couldn't have made that leap without it being as successful as it was on Steam. But I was working web development professionally for several more months before I was actually able to pull the trigger and work on this full time. And you had already been doing it, learning Daz and setting the game up. And like I said, I was coding part-time too, but I was able to pull that trigger at the end of 2021. And then I was able to take over for the coding for Prince of Burbia in January 2022. And ever since it began from that point, it was always... I was happy to do it, and it was the right decision from my perspective.
Yeah, and so it's crazy to think that we've now been doing this full time as our sole source of income for over a year now. And yeah, it's exceeded all of our expectations. And I think that going back to the name of the podcast, if you hadn't taken that risk to plant that seed in 2017, that you probably sensed my internal eye roll a little bit when I was like, okay, here we go again. Let's see what happens with this. But I mean, the reality is that's what it takes to be successful is, you have to try 5 different things, 10 different things before you find what's successful. And you can't be afraid to just plant some seeds, just try something and see what it grows into. And, don't be afraid to go back and revisit things. If we had just considered Prince of Suburbia to be a failure because it was kind of languishing in part-time development and lots of haters were very sure that we would never finish it, if we had just kind of resigned ourselves to that, then we wouldn't be where we are. Like I said, exceeding our own expectations.
Yep, the haters help fuel us. That's a reality. And, talk is cheap. And, you've heard it before, but if you pull the trigger, if you actually do something instead of just talk about it, like, I'm going to do that one day, well, you're not going to do it until you actually fucking do it. Yeah. So go out there and pull the trigger, and you're going to see stuff happen.
Exactly. So, we hope that our story is inspiring to others because we get a lot of enjoyment from watching other people go after their goals. That's something we talk about a lot, like the Omega just said, which is that people love to talk about their goals as if one day this thing is just going to happen. And that thing is not going to happen 5 years from now unless you start doing it now, because things take time to grow, and you're not going to suddenly want to do it more a year from now than you want to do it now. There's the best time to start was yesterday. The next best time is today. So that's our philosophy. And, we hope that our story is an inspiration to others to, get started working towards their goals. So I think that about wraps up how we got started in this industry. If you have any more questions that we did not address, or if you have questions about anything else about us, the games, our studio, or just the industry in general, please reach out to us. I'll make sure that there's links in the description to help you get in touch with us.
We hope we planted some seeds with you. See you next time.
Bye.